Look at that garbage, Dad.
Inside the restaurant, Kael Vane, 25 and heir to a billion-dollar empire, tapped the glass window with his golden fork. "Look at that trash, Dad," Kael sneered, sipping his wine. "Security should hose him down. He's ruining my view of the city." Magnus Vane, the billionaire patriarch, didn't laugh. He froze, his eyes locked onto the trash outside. His hand began to tremble, rattling the silverware on the expensive table. "What did you say?" Magnus whispered, his voice dangerously low. Kael laughed, oblivious to the shift in the air. "I said he's trash, probably a convict." Magnus stood up so abruptly, his chair fell backward with a loud crash, silencing the entire restaurant. He didn't look at his son. He walked straight toward the door, his face pale as a ghost. 2 weeks earlier, Alara was scrubbing grease off the counters at a cheap diner on the south side of the city. She was 24, beautiful, but exhausted. Her life was a delicate house of cards. By day, she pretended to be a refined art student to fit into Kael's world. By night, she scraped leftover food into Tupperware containers to bring home. She checked her phone, a text from Kael. "Pick you up at 8? Where's something expensive?" She sighed, looking at her worn-out sneakers. Kael thought she came from old money in the countryside. He loved her, or at least he loved the version of her she had created. But Alara had a secret that was heavier than her poverty. She wasn't just poor. She was the daughter of the city's most notorious ex-convict, a man named Silas, who had just been released from solitary confinement after 20 years. If Kael found out, his wealthy family would destroy her. Alara arrived home to the small, damp apartment she shared with her father. Silas was sitting in the dark, staring at his hands. They were covered in tattoos, marks of the mafia life he had left behind 20 years ago. He looked terrifying to the outside world, but to Alara, he was just her broken dad. "How was work, Ellie?" he asked, his voice rasping like sandpaper. "It was fine, Dad," she lied, hiding her bruised hands. "I made enough for rent." Silas looked at her with watery eyes. He knew she was dating a rich boy. He knew she was ashamed of him. "You shouldn't have to work like a dog," Silas muttered, clenching his fist. "I used to run this city. I can make one phone call." Alara grabbed his arm. "No, Dad, no more crime. We do this the right way. Promise me." Silas looked away, shame burning his face. "I promise," he lied. The next evening, Kael picked Alara up in his Porsche. He was handsome, charming, and completely blind to reality. As they drove past a homeless shelter, Kael rolled up the windows and locked the doors. Disgusting. People like that choose to be failures. My dad says poverty is a disease of the lazy. Alara felt a lump in her throat. "Sometimes bad things happen to good people, Kael," she said softly. Kael laughed, turning up the music. "Good people don't end up on the street, Alara. Only losers do. My dad built his empire from nothing because he's a winner. That's the blood running through my veins." Alara looked out the window, fighting back tears. She thought of Silas, who had given up everything for a reason she still didn't understand. She realized then that Kael didn't just love money, he despised those without it. A few days later, disaster struck. The rent was raised, and Silas's medication for his prison-acquired lung condition cost $300. They had $40 in the jar. Alara sat on the floor, weeping quietly so her father wouldn't hear. But Silas heard. He walked into the room wearing his old, moth-eaten coat, the only warm thing he owned. "I'm going out," Silas said, his eyes hard. "I have an old friend who owes me a favor. A big favor." Alara panicked. "Dad, you can't go back to the gang. You'll go to jail for life this time." Silas shook his head, a strange softness in his expression. "It's not gang work, Ellie. It's a debt of honor. I'm just going to collect what is mine." He kissed her forehead and walked out into the rain, leaving Alara terrified that she would never see him again. The following week, Kael dropped the bomb. "My father wants to meet you," he said over the phone. Dinner, Saturday night, at the Obsidian Room. Ilara's blood ran cold. The Obsidian Room was the most exclusive spot in the city.
A salad costs more than her rent. Kael, I don't have anything to wear for a place like that, she stammered. Buy something, he said dismissively. I want you to look perfect. My father is intense. He judges people instantly. If he likes you, we're set. If he doesn't, well, he controls my inheritance. The ultimatum hung in the air. Ilara knew she had to go. She sold her mother's vintage necklace, her last possession of value, to buy a simple, elegant black dress. She was gambling everything on this one night. She just prayed her father would stay home and stay hidden. Saturday night arrived. The rain was pouring down in sheets. Ilara was getting ready when Silas walked in, soaked and shivering. He had been out all day looking for work, rejected by every employer because of his criminal record. He saw Ilara in the black dress and smiled sadly. You look like a princess, he whispered. Where are you going? Dinner with Kael's father, she said, avoiding his eyes. Silas stiffened. Vane? Magnus Vane? Ilara nodded. Silas went pale. He grabbed her arm. I'm walking you there. Ilara pulled away. No, Dad, you can't be seen with me. Look at you. Silas didn't yell. He just put on his tattered coat. It's night. It's raining. This city isn't safe. I will walk 10 steps behind you. I won't say a word, but I am walking you. They walked in the rain. Ilara walked ahead, holding an umbrella, while Silas limped behind her in the shadows, getting soaked. When they reached the obsidian room, Ilara stopped a block away. Please go home now, she begged. Silas nodded, hiding in the darkness of a bus stop. I will wait here until you go inside, he promised. Ilara walked toward the entrance, her heart pounding. Just then, Kael's sports car screeched to the curb. Kael stepped out, looking immaculate in a tuxedo. He saw Ilara and smiled, but then his eyes darted to the movement in the shadows. Silas had stepped forward slightly to ensure Ilara was safe. Kael's smile vanished. Hey, Kael shouted at Silas. Get away from her, you creep. Kael didn't recognize him as Ilara's father. He just saw a bum near his girlfriend. Kael munched over to Silas. I'm talking to you, trash, Kael yelled, shoving the frail, older man. Silas stumbled back, losing his balance on the slick pavement. He fell hard into a puddle. Ilara screamed, Kael, stop! But Kael was fueled by arrogance. This is what happens when you don't know your place, Kael spat, kicking dirt onto Silas's coat. Ilara couldn't keep the secret anymore. She threw herself between Kael and Silas, dropping to her knees in the mud. She grabbed her father's face. Dad, are you okay? The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Kael froze. He looked from the dirty, bleeding man to his beautiful girlfriend. Dad, Kael repeated, his face twisting into pure disgust. You? This convict is your father? You lied to me?
Yes, he is, Ilara cried, tears streaming down her face. And he's twice the man you are. Kael stepped back as if she were contagious. You played me, Kael hissed. You're nothing but a gutter rat. We're done. Get him out of here before I call the police. It was at this exact moment that the restaurant doors burst open. Magnus Vane, the billionaire, stormed out. He had seen the man from the window. He ignored his son. He ignored the maitre d' chasing him with an umbrella. Magnus walked straight into the rain, his expensive Italian loafers splashing in the puddles. He stopped 3 feet away from Silas, who was still on the ground. Kael smirked. Dad,
Call security. This garbage is bothering us." Magnus didn't look at Kael. He stared down at Silas, his eyes filling with tears. The billionaire slowly dropped to his knees in the mud, ruining a $5,000 suit. The crowd gasping by the window couldn't believe it. Magnus Vane, the ruthless businessman, lowered his head. "I have been looking for you for 20 years, Magnus whispered, his voice cracking. Silas looked up, blood on his lip, and smiled, a crooked, painful smile. "I told you not to look for me, Mag," Silas rasped. "You had an empire to build." Magnus shook his head, sobbing openly now. He reached out and pulled the dirty, wet ex-convict into a tight embrace. Kael watched, his mouth open in shock. "Dad, what are you doing? He's a criminal." Magnus stood up, pulling Silas up with him. He turned to Kael, his eyes burning with a fury Kael had never seen. "Criminal?" Magnus roared. 30 years ago, there were two young men. They made a mistake. They stole a truck. But when the police came, only one could run. One had a pregnant wife, the other was alone. Magnus pointed at Silas. "He took the gun from my hand. He wiped my prints. He sat in that truck and waited for the cops so I could run, so I could raise you. He did 20 years in maximum security for my crime." Magnus grabbed Silas's hand and held it up. "Every dollar we have, every car you drive, the very clothes on your back, it was bought with his freedom. He isn't the criminal, Kael. He is the savior." Kael turned pale, his arrogance crumbling. But look at him," Kael stammered. "He's nothing." Magnus's face went cold. He released Silas and stepped toward his son. "You are right. Looking at the two of you, I see one man of honor and one piece of trash. But the trash isn't the one wearing the old coat." Magnus pulled out his phone. "Cancel the trust fund," he said into the receiver, staring dead at Kael. "Freeze his cards. Take the keys to the Porsche." Kael panicked. "Dad, you can't be serious. Over him?" Magnus put his arm around Elara and Silas. "You just kicked the man who saved your life. You have nothing. If you want to eat tonight, you can check the dumpster out back. That's why you think people belong, isn't it?" Security guards, realizing the shift in power, stepped forward. They didn't move toward Silas. They moved toward Kael. "Mr. Vane," the guard said, "we need the car keys." Kael screamed, throwing a tantrum like a child, but they dragged him away from the entrance, leaving him standing in the exact spot Silas had stood, cold, wet, and humiliated. Magnus turned to Elara. "I am sorry I didn't find you sooner. Your father was too proud to ask for help." He took off his jacket and draped it over Silas's shoulders. "Come inside. We have a lot of years to catch up on." Elara held one arm, Magnus held the other, and they walked Silas into the warmth of the restaurant, leaving Kael alone in the rain. Inside the obsidian room, the staff scrambled to set a new table. The patrons watched in awe as the billionaire poured the finest wine into the glass of the ex-convict. They laughed, they cried, and for the first time in her life, Elara saw her father's shoulders relax. He wasn't a convict anymore. He was a hero. Through the window, Elara saw a figure pressing his face against the glass, watching them eat. It was Kael. He looked hungry. He looked cold. Elara felt a moment of pity, but then she looked at her father's scarred hands holding the wine glass, hands that had suffered so she could live. She turned away from the window and toasted to the future. The debt had finally been paid. Kael was finally learning the lesson Silas had learned 20 years ago. Stripped of money, a man is only worth what is in his heart. And Kael's account was empty.